The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Tombstone Station as Clara Bennett clutched her worn leather satchel with trembling fingers. The strange pale patches across her arms, the ones the townspeople back in Missouri had whispered about behind cupped hands, seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light in the desert heat. She pulled her long sleeves down further, hiding what others called her curse, what they feared as the mark of something unnatural. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The train's whistle pierced the Arizona air one final time before disappearing into the horizon, leaving Clara alone on the platform with nothing but a crumpled letter from a man named William Turner, who had promised her a new life, a fresh start where her appearance wouldn't matter, where love could bloom despite the ghostly white patterns that decorated her skin like frost on winter glass. But as the hours passed and no one came to claim her, Clara began to understand with sinking certainty that William Turner, like so many others, had taken one look at her condition and decided she was too strange, too marked by whatever force had painted her flesh with these ethereal designs. The rejection cut deeper than all the others because this time, she had traveled 1,000 miles west, believing someone might finally see past her unusual appearance to the woman beneath. Clara had grown accustomed to disappointment. At 23, she had already endured more stares, whispers, and rejections than most people faced in a lifetime. The pale, almost luminescent patches that covered her arms, neck, and face had appeared gradually since childhood, spreading like morning frost across her skin in patterns that seemed to shift and flow when no one was looking directly at them. The doctors in St. Louis had no explanation for her condition. Some called it a rare skin ailment. Others suspected it might be contagious, though no one who spent time with Clara ever developed similar markings. The more superstitious folks in her hometown had darker theories, whispering about curses and supernatural afflictions crossing themselves when she passed on the street. Her mother, God rest her soul, had always insisted Clara was special rather than cursed. "You're marked by something greater than this world," she would say while braiding Clara's auburn hair, careful not to touch the pale patterns that traced delicate spirals along her scalp. "Someday you'll understand why you were chosen to bear these signs." But understanding felt impossible when every potential suitor who showed initial interest disappeared the moment they saw her unusual markings. Clara had resigned herself to spinsterhood until the advertisement appeared in the local newspaper. William Turner, successful rancher in Arizona Territory, seeking a wife for companionship and help managing his growing cattle operation. No mention of physical requirements, no demand for beauty or perfection, just an honest request for partnership and building a life together. Their correspondence had lasted 4 months. Clara had been honest about her condition, describing it as a harmless skin condition that made her appear different but caused no pain or illness. William had seemed understanding, even curious, writing that Arizona was a place where people came to start over, where differences were accepted more readily than in the crowded eastern cities. Now standing alone on the platform as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, Clara realized she had been naive to believe anyone could truly accept her unusual appearance. The ghostly patterns on her skin seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, responding to her emotional distress in ways that made her feel even more isolated and strange. A group of cowboys rode past the station, their horses kicking up clouds of red dust that settled on Clara's dark blue traveling dress. One of them glanced in her direction, and she instinctively turned away, pulling her bonnet lower to hide the delicate tracery of pale markings that decorated her left cheek like frost on a window pane. The town of Tombstone sprawled before her. In the distance, a collection of wooden buildings and adobe structures that shimmered in the heat. Somewhere in that maze of streets and saloons, William Turner was presumably going about his daily business, having decided that a mail-order bride With ghostly skin was too much of a risk to his reputation and standing in the community. Clara checked her small purse, counting the few dollars she had left after purchasing her train ticket and traveling supplies. Enough for a modest meal and perhaps one night's lodging, but certainly not sufficient to fund a return journey to Missouri. She was stranded in a strange territory with nowhere to go and no one to turn to for assistance. As she gathered her courage to venture into town and seek temporary work, a commotion erupted near the livery stable. Shouting voices and the sound of splintering wood drew her attention to where several men seemed to be arguing with increasing intensity. Clara couldn't make out the words from her distance, but the tone suggested the disagreement was escalating toward violence. Suddenly, one of the men drew his pistol, pointing it directly at another man who stood with his back to Clara. The target of the threat seemed unnaturally calm, his hands hanging loose at his sides despite the weapon aimed at his chest. Something about his stillness, his complete lack of fear in the face of mortal danger, struck Clara as remarkable. What happened next defied everything Clara thought she understood about the natural world. The threatened man turned slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile. Like her, he bore markings that set him apart from ordinary people, but his were different. Dark lines traced intricate patterns across his visible skin, and when he moved, they seemed to shift and flow like living shadows. The gunman fired, the sharp crack of the pistol echoing across the desert landscape. But instead of falling, the marked man simply continued walking forward. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The bullet had passed right through him, as if he were made of morning mist, leaving him completely unharmed while the shooter stared in terrified amazement. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she witnessed something that challenged every law of nature she had ever known. The strange man with the shadow markings paused and looked directly at her across the distance, and she felt a jolt of recognition that had nothing to do with having met him before. His eyes found hers with uncanny accuracy, and Clara felt the pale patterns on her own skin begin to glow with soft, warm light. The sensation was not painful, but rather comforting, like being wrapped in a blanket of starlight. For the first time in her life, her unusual markings felt like a gift rather than a curse. The shadow-marked man approached slowly, his boots making no sound on the dusty ground. As he drew closer, Clara could see that his markings were indeed moving, flowing across his skin in patterns that seemed to tell ancient stories. His face was weathered but kind, with silver streaks in his dark hair that suggested he had seen many years and many sorrows. "Miss Bennett," he said in a voice that carried the whisper of desert wind, "you've traveled far from home." Clara stared at him in amazement, her skin continuing to emit its gentle radiance. "How do you know my name, and what are you?" "What am I?" The stranger smiled, and when he did, the shadow patterns on his face shifted into something that looked almost like writing in a language Clara couldn't read, but somehow understood. "My name is Nathan Cross, and like you, I'm marked by the spirit world. As for what we are, that's a longer conversation best held somewhere private." He gestured toward the town where the other men had disappeared, presumably to spread word of what they had witnessed. "Tombstone isn't safe for people like us. There's fear here, and fear makes people dangerous. But I know a place where we can talk freely, where your light and my shadows are welcomed rather than feared." Clara hesitated, every instinct warning her to be cautious of strange men in unfamiliar places. But the gentle glow emanating from her skin in Nathan's presence felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Whatever he was, whatever connection existed between them, it was the first time she had ever felt truly seen and accepted. "Where?" she asked quietly. Nathan's expression grew serious as he studied her glowing markings. "There's a settlement about half a day's ride from here, hidden in the canyon country where the ancient ones once walked. It's called Haven's Rest, and it's home to people the outside world considers too strange to tolerate. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Clara, the markings on your skin aren't a curse or a disease. They're a sign that you can touch the spirit realm, that you can see and interact with forces that exist beyond the physical world. In Haven's Rest, there are others like us, others who bridge the gap between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The explanation should have sounded impossible, but as Clara listened, pieces of her life began falling into place. The way she sometimes saw things that others couldn't, glimpses of figures that appeared and disappeared when she wasn't looking directly at them. The way animals seemed drawn to her, approaching without fear even when they shied away from everyone else. The dreams that felt more real than waking, filled with voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize but somehow understood. "I've always been different," she said softly, touching one of the glowing patterns on her arm. "But I never understood why or what it meant." Nathan nodded with understanding. "The spirit world marked you as one of its own, just as it marked me. But your gift is rarer than mine, Clara. The ability to bring light to the darkness between worlds, to guide lost souls toward peace. It's something that appears perhaps once in a generation." A sudden commotion from the direction of town interrupted their conversation. Clara could see a group of riders approaching, their horses moving at a gallop that suggested urgency or anger. The dust cloud they raised was visible long before she could make out individual figures. "William Turner," Nathan said grimly, his shadow markings darkening as if responding to the threat. "He's coming with others, probably the sheriff and some of his men. They saw what happened at the livery stable, and now they're looking for answers." Clara felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "What do they want with us? To drive us out, or worse?" Tombstone has seen its share of strange occurrences lately, and the townsfolk are getting nervous about anything they can't explain. A woman whose skin glows, and a man who can't be killed by bullets. We represent everything they fear about this untamed territory. Nathan moved to stand between Clara and the approaching riders, his hand resting on the grip of a pistol that looked older than any weapon Clara had ever seen. The metal seemed to shimmer with the same otherworldly quality as his shadow markings. "Can you ride?" he asked without taking his eyes off the dust cloud. "Yes, but I don't have a horse." Nathan whistled, a sound that seemed to carry farther than any human voice should. Moments later, two horses appeared as if materializing from the desert air itself. One was a pale gray mare whose coat seemed to shift between solid and translucent, while the other was a midnight black stallion whose shadow markings matched Nathan's own. "Spirit horses," Nathan explained, helping Clara mount the gray mare. "They can travel between worlds when necessary, and they're faster than any earthly horse when the need arises." As Clara settled into the unfamiliar saddle, she felt the mare's strange warmth beneath her, a sensation that was comforting rather than alarming. The pale patterns on her skin pulsed brighter, and she realized the horse was responding to her presence just as Nathan had. The approaching riders were close enough now that Clara could make out individual faces. William Turner rode at the front, his expression a mixture of anger and fear that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Behind him were several men she didn't recognize, all armed and all looking determined to catch whatever they were chasing. "This way," Nathan said, wheeling his horse toward the east where the desert stretched endlessly toward mountains that shimmered like mirages in the distance. "Haven's Rest lies in that direction, and once we reach the sacred boundaries, they won't be able to follow." They rode hard across the desert landscape, the spirit horses moving with supernatural speed and endurance. Clara found herself adapting to the rhythm of the ride more quickly than she had expected, as if some instinct was guiding her movements. Behind them, the pursuit continued, but their ordinary horses were no match for the ethereal mounts that carried Clara and Nathan toward safety. As they rode, Nathan began to explain more about the world Clara was entering. Haven's Rest was founded by people like us, those marked by the spirit realm for various purposes. Some can speak with the dead, others can walk between worlds, and a few can influence the boundary between life and death itself. He gestured toward Clara's glowing skin, which continued to pulse with soft light despite the bouncing motion of their rapid flight. Your gift is particularly rare because you can anchor spirits who have become lost between worlds. The light you carry acts as a beacon, guiding them either back to life or forward to whatever comes after death. Clara absorbed this information while trying to process the surreal nature of her situation. This morning she had been a rejected mail-order bride with a strange skin condition. Now she was fleeing across the Arizona desert on a ghost horse, learning that she possessed supernatural abilities she had never suspected. "How do you know all this about me?" she called out over the sound of hoofbeats. Nathan's expression grew distant, as if he were remembering something from long ago. "Because I've been waiting for you, Clara. The spirit world told me you would come, that together we would be able to complete a task that neither of us could accomplish alone." Before Clara could ask what task he meant, the landscape around them began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with strange rock formations that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The very air felt different here, charged with an energy that made Clara's skin tingle and her markings pulse more brightly. "We're approaching the boundary," Nathan explained, slowing his horse to a more manageable pace. "This is where the physical world overlaps with the spirit realm. From here on, the rules are different." Clara looked back toward Tombstone and was amazed to see that their pursuers had stopped at what appeared to be an invisible line. The horses were rearing and refusing to cross into the glowing landscape, and the men looked confused and frustrated by their mounts' sudden rebellion. "They can't follow us here," Nathan said with satisfaction. "The horses know better than their riders do. Animals can sense the spirit world boundaries even when humans cannot." As they continued deeper into the strange terrain, Clara began to see things that defied explanation. Figures moved among the rock formations, some appearing solid and human, while others seemed to be made of light or shadow. Plants grew in impossible colors, and the sky itself seemed to shimmer with aurora-like patterns despite the bright afternoon sun. "Welcome to the Threshold Lands," Nathan said, noting her amazement. "This is where those who walk between worlds make their home, and there, in the distance, is Haven's Rest." Clara followed his gaze to where a settlement nestled in a valley, between two mesas that glowed with soft multicolored light. Unlike the rough frontier towns she had seen, this community seemed to blend naturally with the landscape, its buildings constructed from materials that reflected and enhanced the surrounding spiritual energy. As they approached the settlement, Clara could see people moving about their daily business, but these were people unlike any she had ever encountered. Some bore markings similar to Nathan's shadows or her own light, while others seemed to shift between different forms as she watched. Children played in gardens where flowers bloomed in impossible hues, and adults worked at crafts that seemed to involve shaping light and shadow as if they were physical materials. "This is what you were truly meant to find," Nathan said as they rode through gates that seemed to be constructed from crystallized starlight. "Not marriage to William Turner, but a place where your gifts are needed and valued." Clara felt tears of relief and wonder streaming down her cheeks as the pale patterns on her skin responded to the spiritual energy that permeated everything in Haven's Rest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was among people who would understand and accept her exactly as she was. An elderly woman approached them as they dismounted near what appeared to be the settlement's main square. Her skin bore intricate patterns that seemed to be made of living silver, and her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen far more than any single lifetime should contain. "Nathan Cross," she said in a voice that carried the whisper of ancient winds, "you finally brought her home." The woman turned to Clara with a smile that seemed to contain all the warmth of a mother's love. "Welcome, child of light. We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Clara felt the truth of those words resonate in her bones as her markings pulsed with increasing brightness. Whatever lay ahead in this magical settlement, whatever purpose had drawn her across the continent to this moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her real life was just beginning. The rejection that had brought her to Tombstone Station, the years of feeling cursed and outcast, the journey across hostile territory, all of it had been necessary to bring her to this place where her light could finally shine without fear or shame. In Nathan Cross and the people of Haven's Rest, she had found not just acceptance, but understanding of what she truly was. As the sun began to set over the glowing mesas, painting the sky in colors that existed nowhere else on Earth, Clara Bennett took her first steps into a world where being different was not a curse, but a calling. The morning light in Haven's Rest was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. Instead of the harsh yellow glare of ordinary sunlight, the dawn here arrived in waves of soft pearl and lavender that seemed to nourish rather than merely illuminate. She woke in a guest cottage constructed from what appeared to be solidified moonbeams, her pale markings glowing gently in response to the spiritual energy that permeated every stone and timber of the settlement. Through her window, Clara could see Nathan Cross standing in the central courtyard, his shadow markings moving across his skin like living calligraphy as he spoke with several other residents. Even from a distance, she could sense the quiet authority he commanded among these extraordinary people, the way they turned to him for guidance and wisdom. The elderly woman who had welcomed them the previous evening, whom Clara had learned was called Mother Sage, appeared at her door with a breakfast tray that defied the laws of nature. The food seemed to glow with its own inner light, and when Clara tasted the fruit, it carried flavors that reminded her of childhood dreams and half-remembered lullabies. "The sustenance here is different from what you knew in the outer world," Mother Sage explained, settling into a chair that seemed to mold itself to accommodate her silver-marked form. "Everything in Haven's Rest is infused with spiritual energy. It nourishes not just the body, but the soul as well." Clara found that the magical food satisfied her in ways that ordinary meals never had, filling her with strength and clarity that extended far beyond mere physical nourishment. "How long has this place existed?" she asked, marveling at how natural it felt to accept these impossible circumstances. "Time moves differently here," Mother Sage replied with a knowing smile. "Some say Haven's Rest has existed for centuries. Others claim it was founded just yesterday. Both are true in their own way. The settlement exists outside the normal flow of time, anchored to the spirit realm rather than the physical world." As Clara finished her breakfast, Mother Sage began to explain the delicate balance that allowed Haven's Rest to exist in harmony between two worlds. Every resident here serves a purpose in maintaining the boundary between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Nathan Cross is our guardian, protecting us from those who would harm or exploit our gifts. Others serve as healers, teachers, or guides for lost spirits. "And what is my purpose?" Clara asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Mother Sage's silver markings brightened as she studied Clara's glowing patterns. "You, dear child, are what we call a light bearer. Your gift allows you to anchor wayward spirits, to provide them with the illumination they need to find their proper path. It's a rare and precious ability, one that appears perhaps once in a generation." The weight of this revelation settled over Clara like a mantle of responsibility. All her life, she had seen herself as cursed, marked by something that made her unfit for normal society. Now she was learning that her unusual appearance was actually a sign of extraordinary purpose. A commotion in the courtyard drew their attention to the window. Clara could see Nathan gesturing emphatically while speaking to a group of Haven's Rest residents, his expression grave with concern. Several people bore fresh wounds that glowed with unnatural light, suggesting they had encountered something far more dangerous than ordinary human adversaries. "What's happening?" Clara asked, instinctively moving toward the door. Mother Sage's expression grew troubled. "It appears our peaceful existence has been discovered by forces that should not have been able to find us. Nathan will want to speak with you about this, Clara. Your arrival here was not coincidental, and I fear the timing suggests a greater threat than we initially understood." They made their way to the courtyard where Nathan was addressing the gathered residents. Up close, Clara could see that his shadow markings were agitated, moving more rapidly across his skin in patterns that spoke of urgency and danger. He noticed her approach. His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her luminous patterns pulse in response. "Clara," he said, breaking away from the group to join her. "We need to talk privately. Something has happened that changes everything. We thought we knew about your arrival here." They walked together toward the edge of the settlement, where the boundary between the physical and spirit worlds created a shimmering aurora that danced across the landscape. Nathan's expression was serious as he began to explain the situation that had developed overnight. "A group of spirit hunters arrived at our borders just before dawn," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "These aren't ordinary humans from Tombstone or any other frontier town. They're people who have learned to track and capture those with supernatural abilities, usually to exploit our gifts for their own purposes." Clara felt a chill of fear despite the warm spiritual energy that surrounded them. How did they find Haven's Rest? "You said it was protected by boundaries that ordinary people couldn't cross." Nathan's shadow markings darkened as he revealed the troubling truth. "They're being led by someone who shares our markings, someone who was once welcome in places like this. A traitor who has learned to use their gifts in service of those who would cage or destroy us." The implications were terrifying. If someone with supernatural abilities was helping ordinary humans hunt people like Clara and Nathan, then nowhere would be truly safe. The protected boundaries and spiritual barriers that guarded Haven's Rest could be compromised by someone who understood how to navigate them. "What do they want?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "They want you," Nathan said bluntly. "The Lightbearer gift is incredibly rare and valuable. There are people in the outside world who would pay enormous sums to control someone with your abilities, to force you to use your connection to the spirit realm for their benefit." Clara absorbed this information while trying to process the magnitude of the threat they faced. "But why now? I've had these markings my entire life. Why would anyone come looking for me in Haven's Rest?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke with the careful precision of someone sharing dangerous secrets. "Because your arrival here has awakened something that has been dormant for generations. The spirit realm has been trying to communicate an urgent message, but it needed someone with your specific gifts to serve as a conduit." He gestured toward the glowing mesas that surrounded the settlement, their peaks crowned with aurora like displays that had grown more intense since Clara's arrival. "The barriers between the world of the living and the world of the dead are weakening. Clara, something is attempting to break through from the other side. Something that could destroy the balance we've worked so hard to maintain." The revelation struck Clara like a physical blow. Her arrival in Haven's Rest hadn't been a coincidence or a simple escape from her past troubles. She had been drawn here by forces beyond her understanding, called to serve a purpose that could determine the fate of both worlds. "What kind of something?" she asked, dreading the answer. Nathan's expression grew distant, as if he were remembering events from long ago. "There are entities in the deepest parts of the spirit realm that feed on the boundary between life and death. They've been contained for centuries by the combined efforts of people like us, but something has changed recently. The barriers are failing, and if these creatures break through into our world, they'll consume everything that lives." Clara felt the pale patterns on her skin pulse with increasing urgency, as if responding to the cosmic threat Nathan described. And you think I can help stop this? I know you can, Nathan said with quiet certainty. The spirit realm marked you for this purpose, Clara. Your light doesn't just guide lost souls to peace. It can also serve as an anchor for the boundaries between worlds, strengthening the barriers that keep the consuming darkness at bay. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but Clara also felt a strange sense of rightness about Nathan's words. All her life, she had sensed that her unusual markings meant something more than mere difference. Now she was learning that they represented a calling that could save both the living and the dead from unimaginable horror. A sudden disturbance at the settlement's edge interrupted their conversation. Clara could see figures moving through the protective aurora, shapes that seemed to flicker between human and something else entirely. The spirit hunters had found a way past Haven's Rest's defenses, guided by their traitorous ally who understood the settlement's vulnerabilities. They're inside the boundaries, Nathan said grimly, his hand moving to the ancient pistol at his side. We need to get you to safety while the others organize our defenses. But Clara surprised herself by shaking her head. No, Nathan. If I'm truly here for a purpose, if my gifts are needed to protect these people and maintain the balance between worlds, then I can't hide while others fight to defend what we're building. Nathan studied her face, seeing the determination that had replaced her earlier uncertainty. Clara, you don't understand how dangerous these hunters are. They have weapons designed specifically to capture or neutralize people with supernatural abilities. If they take you, everything we're fighting to protect will be lost. Then we make sure they don't take me, Clara replied with a confidence that surprised them both. You said my light can anchor boundaries between worlds. Maybe it's time to test that ability. As they spoke, the attackers drew closer to the settlement's center, their presence causing the spiritual energy that sustained Haven's Rest to flicker and waver. Clara could see residents fleeing toward secure buildings while others took defensive positions, their various supernatural abilities manifesting as they prepared to protect their sanctuary. The leader of the attacking force became visible as they emerged from behind one of the glowing rock formations. Clara gasped in recognition, not because she had seen this person before, but because their markings were a twisted mirror of her own. Where Clara's patterns glowed with warm, welcoming light, this individual's skin bore designs that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it, creating patches of unnatural darkness that hurt to look at directly. A shadow bearer, Nathan said, with disgust. Someone who chose to corrupt their gift, to use their connection to the spirit realm for selfish purposes. They're the ones who opened the way for these hunters to find us. The shadow bearer raised their voice to address the entire settlement, their words carrying an authority that made Clara's markings pulse with instinctive revulsion. People of Haven's Rest, we have not come to destroy your sanctuary. We seek only the light bearer who arrived yesterday. Surrender her to us, and we will withdraw without further conflict. Mother Sage appeared beside Clara and Nathan, her silver markings blazing with protective fury. Never, she called back to the attackers. We do not abandon our own to those who would exploit the gifts we've been given. The shadow bearer's response was immediate and devastating. They raised their hands, and waves of consuming darkness poured from their corrupted markings, washing over the settlement's protective barriers and causing them to weaken visibly. Buildings that had stood for generations began to flicker and fade, their spiritual foundations undermined by the attacking force. They're unmaking Haven's Rest, Mother Sage said with horror. If this continues, the settlement will fade back into the spirit realm, and everyone here will be lost between worlds. Clara felt something deep within her respond to the crisis, a reservoir of power she had never known existed. The pale patterns on her skin began to glow with increasing intensity, pushing back against the encroaching darkness that threatened to destroy everything she had come to value. Nathan, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them, I need you to trust me. I think I know what to do, but I'll need your protection while I attempt it." Nathan's shadow markings coiled around his arms like living armor. As he drew his ancient pistol, "Whatever you're planning, Clara, do it quickly. I can hold them off for a while, but not indefinitely." Clara closed her eyes and reached out with senses she was only beginning to understand, feeling for the spiritual foundations that anchored Haven's Rest to both worlds. She could sense the damage the Shadow Bearer was inflicting, the way their corrupted power was unraveling the careful balance that allowed this settlement to exist. But she could also feel something else, a vast network of light that connected every person in Haven's Rest to the cosmic forces that sustained their sanctuary. Drawing on this network, Clara began to weave her own luminous energy into the settlement's defenses, reinforcing the barriers between worlds and pushing back against the consuming darkness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Her pale markings blazed with brilliant radiance that spread outward from her position, flowing along the ground and through the air to touch every building, every resident, every blade of grass in the settlement. The aurora that crowned the surrounding mesas brightened in response, creating a dome of protective light that made the attacking forces recoil in pain and surprise. "Impossible," the Shadow Bearers snarled, their dark markings writhing with frustrated rage. No single light bearer should possess such power. But Clara was no longer acting alone. She could feel the combined strength of every resident of Haven's Rest flowing through her, their various gifts merging with her own to create something greater than any individual ability. Together, they were weaving new boundaries between the worlds, barriers stronger than anything that had existed before. Nathan stood guard beside her, his ancient pistol spitting bullets that seemed to be forged from solid shadow. Each shot found its mark among the attacking forces, and Clara realized that his weapon was somehow drawing power from her light, transforming her luminous energy into projectiles that could harm their supernatural enemies. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Clara maintained her connection to the settlement's spiritual network while Nathan and the other defenders fought to protect her from the hunters who pressed their attack with increasing desperation. Several times, enemies came close enough to threaten her directly, only to be driven back by the combined efforts of Haven's Rest's guardians. Finally, the Shadow Bearer made a desperate gambit, abandoning their followers to launch a direct assault on Clara herself. They moved with inhuman speed, their corrupted markings leaving trails of consuming darkness as they crossed the courtyard. In seconds, but Nathan was ready for them. His shadow markings erupted outward, creating a barrier of living darkness that met the Shadow Bearer's attack head-on. The collision of opposed forces sent shockwaves through both the physical and spirit realms, causing reality itself to ripple and bend around the combatants. Clara felt the moment of perfect balance, when the forces of light and shadow, creation and destruction, hung in equilibrium. In that instant, she understood what needed to be done. Instead of fighting the Shadow Bearer's darkness, she embraced it, allowing her light to merge with their shadows in a unity that transcended the artificial division between opposing forces. The result was a transformation that neither attacker nor defender had anticipated. The Shadow Bearer's corrupted markings began to change, the consuming darkness giving way to patterns that balanced light and shadow in perfect harmony. Their expression shifted from rage to wonder as they experienced their true gifts for the first time in years. "What have you done?" they whispered, staring at their transformed markings in amazement. "I've shown you what you really are," Clara replied, gently. Not a creature of darkness or light alone, but someone meant to bridge the gap between opposing forces. The attacking hunters, seeing their leader transformed and their supernatural advantages neutralized, began to retreat toward the settlement's borders. But Clara called out to stop them, her voice carrying new authority that commanded attention from all present. "Wait," she said, her luminous markings pulsing with compassionate light. "You don't have to return to lives of hunting and exploitation. There's a place here for anyone willing to use their gifts to protect rather than destroy." Several of the hunters paused, clearly torn between their previous allegiances and the possibility of redemption Clara offered. The transformed shadow bearer, now bearing markings that swirled with balanced light and darkness, turned to address their former followers. "She speaks truth," they said, their voice carrying new depth and wisdom. "I have spent years corrupting my gifts in service of those who would cage and exploit us. But here, in this moment, I remember what it means to serve a higher purpose." One by one, the hunters laid down their weapons and approached the settlement center, drawn by the promise of acceptance and the chance to use their abilities for protection rather than predation. Clara felt the spiritual network of Haven's Rest expanding to include these new members, their various gifts adding strength and diversity to the community's defenses. Nathan holstered his ancient pistol and moved to stand beside Clara, his shadow markings settling into peaceful patterns that complemented her gentle radiance. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone transform a corrupted shadow bearer, let alone offer redemption to an entire force of hunters." Clara looked around at the settlement that had become her home, at the people who had welcomed her and the former enemies who were now seeking to join their community. "I think I'm beginning to understand my true purpose here," she said with growing confidence. "It's not just about maintaining boundaries between worlds or anchoring lost spirits. It's about bringing together people who have been divided by fear and misunderstanding." Mother Sage approached them, her silver markings glowing with pride and approval. "The spirit realm chose well when it marked you as our light bearer, Clara. You've not only defended Haven's Rest today, you've shown us new possibilities for growth and redemption." As the sun set over the glowing mesas, painting the sky in colors that existed nowhere else on Earth, Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction and belonging. The woman who had arrived as a rejected mail-order bride with a strange skin condition was discovering strengths and purposes she had never imagined possible. But even as she celebrated this victory, Clara sensed that greater challenges lay ahead. The weakening boundaries between worlds that Nathan had described still needed to be addressed, and the cosmic threat of entities seeking to consume the barrier between life and death remained a looming danger. Tomorrow would bring new tests of her abilities and new opportunities to serve the community that had become her family. But tonight, surrounded by the people she had helped save and protect, Clara Bennett finally understood what it meant to be home. 3 months had passed since the spirit hunter's attack on Haven's Rest, and Clara had never imagined how completely her life could transform in such a short time. The settlement had grown from a hidden sanctuary into a thriving community that welcomed supernatural refugees from across the territory. What had once been a collection of structures housing perhaps 30 souls now bustled with over 100 residents, each bringing their own unique gifts and perspectives to the growing haven. Clara stood atop the highest mesa overlooking the expanded settlement, her pale markings glowing softly in the pre-dawn light as she performed her daily ritual of strengthening the boundaries between worlds. This had become her most important responsibility, requiring her to reach out with her light bearer abilities every morning and evening to reinforce the spiritual barriers that protected not just Haven's Rest but the entire region from the cosmic threats that pressed against reality itself. Nathan emerged from the morning mist that clung to the mesa's edge, his shadow markings flowing in patterns that had become as familiar to Clara as her own heartbeat. Over the past months, they had developed a working relationship that went far beyond their initial alliance of necessity. He served as her protector and guide while she provided the spiritual anchor that kept their community stable and secure. "The eastern boundaries are holding strong," Nathan reported, settling beside her on the rocky outcrop where they met each dawn. "But I'm sensing new disturbances along the northern approaches. Something is testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses." Clara extended her awareness northward, feeling through the network of spiritual energy that she had learned to navigate with increasing skill. What she sensed made her luminous patterns pulse with concern. "It's not random testing," she said after a moment of concentration. "There's intelligence behind these probes, something that understands our defenses and is looking for specific vulnerabilities." They had learned to work together with remarkable efficiency, Nathan's experience as a guardian and warrior complementing Clara's growing mastery of her light-bearer abilities. Where once she had been a frightened woman fleeing rejection and persecution, she had become a confident leader whose decisions affected the safety and well-being of everyone in Haven's Rest. "We should convene the council," Nathan suggested, referring to the governing body they had established to make decisions for the growing community. "If something is planning a coordinated attack on our defenses, everyone needs to be prepared." Clara nodded, but her attention was caught by movement in the settlement below. A new group of refugees had arrived during the night, their exhausted figures huddled around the welcome fires that burned perpetually at Haven's Rest's entrance. Even from a distance, she could see the telltale signs of supernatural markings on several of the newcomers. More survivors from the outside world, she observed, feeling a familiar mixture of compassion and concern. Each new arrival strengthened their community, but also brought additional responsibilities and potential complications. Nathan followed her gaze, his expression growing thoughtful. "That's the third group this week. Word is spreading faster than we anticipated about what we're building here." They made their way down from the mesa, taking the winding path that Clara had helped design to incorporate defensive positions and spiritual focusing points. The trail itself had become a work of art, lined with crystals that resonated with the settlement's protective energies and plantings that grew in impossible colors, thanks to the spiritual nourishment that permeated everything in Haven's Rest. As they approached the newcomers, Clara felt her markings respond to the presence of others bearing supernatural gifts. Among the group were two children whose skin shimmered with patterns that reminded her of flowing water, an elderly man whose markings seemed to be carved from living wood, and a young woman whose entire form flickered between solid and translucent. Mother Sage was already attending to the refugees, her silver markings glowing with the healing energy she used to treat both physical and spiritual wounds. She looked up as Clara and Nathan approached, her ancient eyes conveying both welcome and warning. "These folks have traveled far to reach us," she said quietly. "They bring troubling news from the eastern settlements." The elderly man with the wood-carved markings stepped forward, his voice cracking with exhaustion and grief. "My name is Samuel Ironwood, and we've come from what used to be the town of Cedar Falls. 3 days ago, something came out of the night and consumed everything." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Consumed everything? What do you mean?" Samuel's weathered face twisted with remembered horror. "Not destroyed, miss. Consumed. The buildings, the people, even the land itself. All of it just faded away like it never existed. Only those of us with the markings were able to escape, and even then barely." The young woman who flickered between states spoke up, her voice carrying the whisper of wind through empty spaces. "I'm Rebecca Fade, and I saw what happened to my family. The darkness didn't kill them, it absorbed them, made them part of itself. They're still there, trapped inside the consuming void, aware but unable to escape." Nathan's shadow markings darkened with anger and determination. "The entities I warned you about, the ones trying to break through from the deepest parts of the spirit realm. They found a way to manifest in our world." Clara absorbed this terrifying information while her mind raced through the implications. The cosmic threat they had been preparing to face was no longer a distant possibility, but an immediate reality that had already begun destroying communities and consuming innocent lives. How many people were lost at Cedar Falls? She asked, dreading the answer. "Nearly 300 souls," Samuel replied, his wooden markings creaking with anguish. "Men, women, children, all of them absorbed into something that shouldn't exist in our world. Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. As the primary light bearer for their region, the protection of not just Haven's Rest, but all the surrounding communities fell largely to her. The knowledge that she might have been able to prevent the tragedy at Cedar Falls, if she had acted sooner, filled her with guilt and determination. "We can't let this happen to anyone else," she said firmly, her pale markings blazing with renewed purpose. "Nathan, we need to expand our protective boundaries to cover a much larger area." Nathan studied her face, seeing the resolve that had replaced her earlier uncertainty. "Clara, that kind of expansion would require enormous amounts of energy. The strain on you could be devastating." "Then we find a way to share the burden," Clara replied without hesitation. "We have over 100 people here now, each with their own supernatural gifts. There has to be a way to combine our abilities into something powerful enough to protect the entire region." Mother Sage nodded approvingly, her silver markings brightening with enthusiasm for Clara's proposal. "The ancient texts speak of great workings, rituals that could link multiple gifted individuals into a single protective network. But such ceremonies are dangerous and have not been attempted for generations." As they spoke, more residents of Haven's Rest gathered around the newcomers, offering food, shelter, and comfort to those who had lost everything to the consuming darkness. Clara watched her adopted community respond with characteristic generosity, and was struck by how much they had all grown together over the past months. The former spirit hunters who had joined them after their leader's transformation had become some of the most dedicated protectors of the settlement, their knowledge of supernatural threats proving invaluable for the community's security. The transformed shadow bearer, who now went by the name Balance Walker, had developed new techniques for combining light and darkness that strengthened everyone's abilities. "We should begin preparations for a great working immediately," Clara decided, her voice carrying the authority that had developed naturally as she embraced her role as the community's spiritual anchor. "If these consuming entities are already manifesting in our world, we may not have much time before they attempt an assault on Haven's Rest itself." Nathan moved to stand beside her, his presence providing the steady support that had become essential to her confidence and effectiveness. "I'll organize the physical defenses while you work on the spiritual preparations. If something that can consume entire towns comes for us, we'll need every advantage we can gather." Over the following days, Haven's Rest transformed into a hive of purposeful activity as the community prepared for what might be their greatest challenge yet. Clara worked with Mother Sage and the other spiritually gifted residents to research the ancient rituals needed for a great working, while Nathan coordinated with the guardians and warriors to establish defensive positions around the settlements. Expanded perimeter. The refugees from Cedar Falls provided valuable intelligence about the consuming entities, describing how the darkness had moved and attacked, what defenses had proven effective, and which had failed completely. Rebecca Fade, with her ability to exist partially in the spirit realm, proved especially useful in understanding how the entities operated between worlds. "They don't just destroy," she explained during one of the planning sessions. "They unmake things, removing them from existence itself. That's why the land at Cedar Falls looks like it was never settled, why there are no ruins or debris. Everything that was there has been absorbed into the consuming void." Clara found this information both terrifying and illuminating. If they're unmaking reality itself, then conventional defenses won't be enough. We need to strengthen the fundamental fabric of existence in this area, make it too stable for them to unmake. The concept led to intensive research into the deepest mysteries of how supernatural abilities interacted with the basic structure of reality. Clara discovered that her light-bearer gifts went far beyond guiding lost spirits or anchoring boundaries between worlds. Her luminous energy could actually reinforce the quantum foundations that held existence together, making areas under her protection resistant to the unmaking effects of the consuming entities. but the scale of protection needed to cover the entire region would require power beyond what any single individual could provide. The great working they were planning would need to link dozens of gifted people into a unified network, each contributing their unique abilities to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Nathan proved invaluable during the preparation. His experience as a guardian, and his deep knowledge of supernatural threats, helping to identify potential weaknesses in their plans. The entities will try to disrupt the great working while it's being performed, he warned during one of their evening strategy sessions. We need to be prepared for an attack at the moment when our defenses are most vulnerable. Clara had come to treasure these quiet moments they shared each evening, when the day's responsibilities were completed and they could focus on each other, rather than the cosmic threats that surrounded them. Their relationship had evolved from a partnership of necessity into something much deeper, though neither had yet found the words to acknowledge the growing emotional connection between them. "Nathan," she said softly as they watched the aurora patterns dance above the settlement, "I need you to know that I couldn't do any of this without your support. You've become more than my protector or partner in this work." Nathan's shadow markings swirled with patterns that Clara had learned to recognize as expressions of deep emotion. "Clara, when I first saw you at that train station in Tombstone, I thought I was simply helping another refugee find safety. I never imagined that you would become the center of everything that gives my life meaning." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities that went far beyond their professional partnership. Clara felt her luminous patterns respond to his presence with increasing brightness, as if her very essence was reaching out to connect with his. Before either could speak further, a commotion near the settlement's edge interrupted their moment of intimacy. Sentries were calling out warnings, their voices carrying notes of alarm that sent both Clara and Nathan rushing toward the source of the disturbance. What they found at the northern boundary defied explanation. A section of the protective aurora that surrounded Haven's Rest was flickering and fading, as if something was draining the spiritual energy that sustained it. But there was no visible threat, no attacking force that could account for the weakening. "Defenses. It's starting," Rebecca Fade said, her translucent form materializing beside them. The same thing happened at Cedar Falls just before the consuming darkness manifested. The boundaries between worlds begin to weaken, and then something breaks through that shouldn't exist. Clara extended her awareness toward the failing boundary, trying to understand what was causing the disruption. What she sensed made her luminous markings pulse with alarm. Something vast and hungry was pressing against the barriers between worlds, testing the strength of the protections they had worked so hard to establish. "The great working needs to happen now," she said urgently. "If we wait any longer, the entities will be able to manifest before our defenses are ready." Nathan nodded grimly, signaling to the sentries to alert the entire settlement. "Then we gather everyone and perform the ritual tonight. It's not ideal timing, but we may not get another chance." As word spread through Haven's Rest that the great working would begin immediately, Clara felt a mixture of anticipation and terror about what lay ahead. The ritual would either create a protective network powerful enough to shield the entire region from the consuming entities, or it would fail catastrophically and leave them defenseless against forces that could unmake reality itself. The settlement transformed as residents took their predetermined positions for the ceremony. Those with spiritual gifts formed concentric circles around the central focus point, where Clara would anchor the network, while the guardians and warriors established defensive perimeters to protect the ritual from any external interference. Mother Sage approached Clara with an ancient crystal that pulsed with inner light, its faceted surface reflecting patterns that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal perception. "This is the heart stone of Haven's Rest," she explained, placing the artifact in Clara's hands. "It contains the accumulated spiritual energy of everyone who has ever found sanctuary here. Use it to amplify your own gifts during the great working." Clara felt the crystal's power resonating with her luminous markings, creating harmonics that strengthened her connection to both the spirit realm and the physical world. Holding the Heartstone was like touching the very essence of what made Haven's Rest special, the accumulated hopes and dreams of everyone who had found acceptance and purpose within its boundaries. Nathan took his position as her primary guardian, his ancient pistol loaded with bullets forged from crystallized shadow and light. "Whatever happens during the ritual, Clara, I'll be here to protect you. Focus on the working, and trust me to handle any threats that emerge." As the ceremony began, Clara felt the spiritual network of Haven's Rest expand and intensify beyond anything she had previously experienced. Each resident contributed their unique gifts to the growing matrix of power, creating connections that strengthened rather than depleted individual abilities. The sensation was intoxicating and overwhelming, like being connected to every star in the sky while remaining grounded in the earth beneath her feet. Clara could sense the thoughts and emotions of everyone participating in the great working, their combined determination creating a unified purpose that transcended individual concerns. But as the network reached its peak intensity, the consuming entities launched their assault on the weakened boundaries. Darkness poured through the failing barriers, bringing with it a wrongness that made reality itself recoil in horror. The entities were not merely destructive but antithetical to existence, their very presence causing the fabric of the world to unravel. Clara felt the network of participants waver as the full magnitude of the threat became apparent. The consuming darkness was vast beyond comprehension, a cosmic horror that had been pressing against the boundaries between worlds for eons, waiting for a moment of weakness to break through and devour everything that existed. But she also felt something else, a deeper understanding of her true purpose that went beyond protecting a single settlement or even a single world. The Light-Bearer gift was not just about anchoring spirits or strengthening boundaries. It was about serving as a beacon of hope and determination in the face of ultimate despair, about refusing to surrender to forces that sought to reduce everything to nothingness. Drawing on the combined strength of the entire network, Clara raised the Heartstone above her head and let her luminous markings blaze with power that transformed night into day across the entire region. The light that poured from her was not mere illumination, but the essence of existence itself, pushing back against the consuming darkness and reinforcing the fundamental structures that held reality together. The battle between light and darkness, creation and consumption, raged across multiple dimensions as Clara and the network of Haven's Rest residents fought to preserve not just their own world, but the cosmic balance that allowed any world to exist. The outcome would determine whether the consuming entities broke through to devour everything that lived, or whether the boundaries between worlds could be restored and strengthened beyond any previous achievement. In that moment of ultimate crisis, Clara finally understood why she had been marked by the spirit realm, why her path had led from rejection and exile to this place of acceptance and purpose. She was not just a light-bearer, but a guardian of existence itself, chosen to stand against the ultimate darkness and ensure that hope would always triumph over despair. The consuming darkness pressed against Clara's blazing light with a hunger that seemed to devour hope itself. Through the spiritual network connecting every resident of Haven's Rest, she could feel their combined fear and determination as they witnessed the cosmic horror that sought to unmake their world. The entities beyond the boundaries were not mere creatures, but manifestations of absolute negation, beings that existed solely to reduce everything to the void from which nothing could return. As Clara channeled the combined power of the great, working through the Heartstone, she became aware of something unexpected within the consuming darkness. Familiar patterns of spiritual energy, signatures she recognized from her growing catalog of supernatural abilities. The entities were not acting alone in their assault on reality. They had allies among the living, people with gifts like her own who had chosen to serve the forces of destruction rather than creation. "Nathan," she called out over the roar of cosmic forces colliding around them. "There are corrupted bearers working with the entities. They're using their abilities to weaken our defenses from within the network itself." Nathan's shadow markings erupted into defensive patterns as he scanned the assembled participants in the Great Working, his experienced eye searching for signs of betrayal among their ranks. The ancient pistol in his hand seemed to pulse with its own awareness, the crystallized ammunition responding to the presence of threats, both seen and unseen. The first attack came not from the consuming darkness beyond the boundaries, but from within their own protective circle. One of the newer residents, a man whose markings had seemed to glow with gentle amber light, suddenly revealed his true nature as patterns of corrupted energy spread across his skin like infection. The amber glow twisted into sickly yellow streaks that drained power from the spiritual network rather than contributing to it. "Thomas Goldvin was never one of us," Balance Walker shouted, their own markings swirling between light and shadow as they moved to intercept the traitor. "He's been feeding information to the entities, helping them understand our defenses." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled community as they realized their sanctuary had been infiltrated by someone working to destroy them from within. But Thomas Goldvein was not alone in his betrayal. 3 other supposed refugees revealed themselves as agents of the consuming darkness, their gifts twisted into weapons designed to sabotage the Great Working at its moment of greatest vulnerability. Clara felt the spiritual network begin to unravel as the corrupted bearers attempted to reverse the flow of energy, turning their protective ritual into a beacon that would guide the entities directly into their world. The heartstone in her hands grew burning hot as competing forces tried to claim its power for opposing purposes. "We have to eject them from the network," Mother Sage called out, her silver markings blazing with furious indignation. "If they remain connected, they'll corrupt the entire working." But severing the traitors from the spiritual network would weaken their defenses, just as the entities were mounting their strongest assault on the boundaries between worlds. Clara found herself facing an impossible choice between maintaining their full power with corrupted elements or reducing their strength to preserve the purity of their purpose. The decision was made for her when Rebecca Fade materialized directly behind Thomas Goldvine, her translucent form allowing her to move undetected until she could strike. "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven," she whispered as she reached into his chest with hands that existed partially in the spirit realm. What she pulled from Goldvine's body was not his heart, but a writhing mass of darkness that had been feeding on his life force while controlling his actions. The corrupted bearer collapsed as the parasitic entity was removed, his own markings returning to their original amber glow as he gasped in confusion and horror. "They were possessed," Rebecca announced as she repeated the process with the other traitors, each extraction revealing similar parasitic entities that had been puppeting their hosts. The consuming darkness didn't need to recruit willing allies. It simply took control of people with the right abilities. The revelation changed everything about their understanding of the threat they faced. The entities were not only capable of unmaking physical reality, but could also corrupt and control the very people meant to defend against them. No one with supernatural abilities was safe from potential possession by the forces seeking to destroy existence itself. Clara felt a new level of determination flow through her as she realized the full scope of what they were fighting against. This was not simply a battle for Haven's Rest or even their region, but a cosmic conflict that would determine whether free will and individual identity could survive in a universe where parasitic entities could override anyone's consciousness. "Nathan," she said, her voice carrying new authority born of absolute conviction, "I need you to do something that might sound impossible." Nathan moved closer, his shadow markings coiling around his arms like living armor as he prepared for whatever she might ask of him. "Name it, Clara, whatever you need." "I need you to shoot me," she said calmly, causing gasps of shock from everyone within hearing distance. "Not to harm me, but to anchor my consciousness in the physical world while I enter the spirit realm, directly to confront these entities at their source. The request was unprecedented and terrifying in its implications. Light-bearers were not meant to travel fully into the spirit realm while still living, as the experience could trap their consciousness between worlds or drive them permanently insane. But Clara had realized that conventional defenses would never be enough against enemies that could possess and corrupt their defenders. "Clara, that's beyond dangerous," Nathan protested, though she could see in his eyes that he understood the necessity of her plan. "If something goes wrong while you're in the spirit realm, you might not be able to find your way back." "Then you'll have to guide me home," Clara replied, reaching out to touch his face with fingers that glowed with warm radiance. "Your shadow markings connect you to the same cosmic forces that I channel through light. Together, we might be able to do what neither of us could accomplish alone." Mother Sage stepped forward, her ancient wisdom clearly troubled by what Clara was proposing. "Child, what you're suggesting has never been attempted. The risks are incalculable." "So are the consequences of failure," Clara responded firmly. "If we can't stop these entities at their source, they'll continue corrupting and possessing people with gifts until there's no one left to defend reality itself." As she spoke, the consuming darkness beyond the boundaries pressed more aggressively against their defenses, sensing the disruption caused by the revelation of possessed traitors within their ranks. Several sections of the protective aurora began to flicker and fade, allowing tendrils of absolute negation to probe into their world. The sight of reality beginning to unravel at the edges spurred Clara to immediate action. She raised the heart stone above her head and channeled every ounce of her light-bearer abilities into a concentrated beam that pierced the boundaries between worlds. Instead of strengthening their defenses, she was deliberately opening a pathway that would allow her consciousness to travel into the spirit realm while her body remained anchored in the physical world. Nathan understood what she needed from him without further explanation. His ancient pistol moved in his hand, the weapon somehow changing itself to fire not bullets, but focused streams of shadow, energy that would create a connection between Clara's physical body and her traveling spirit. "I will hold the link as long as you need," he promised, his shadow marking spreading across his skin in patterns that matched the flow of his weapon's power. "But Clara, you have to promise me you will come back. I cannot lose you to the spirit world." The admission carried weight beyond simple professional partnership, acknowledging the depth of feeling that had grown between them over their months of shared purpose and danger. Clara felt her glowing markings pulse in response to his emotional honesty, creating sounds that strengthened the connection between their different but matching abilities. "I promise," she said softly, then added with fierce determination, "and when I return, we are going to have a conversation about what we mean to each other." With that statement, Clara released her consciousness from her physical form and followed the beam of light she had created into the spirit realm itself. The change was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a feeling of expanding beyond the limits of flesh and bone, while staying connected to the material world through Nathan's shadow link. The spirit realm was vast beyond understanding, a dimension where thoughts became landscapes and emotions took physical form. Clara found herself in a place that seemed to be built from crystallized starlight, where pathways of glowing energy connected floating islands of consciousness that represented every soul that had ever existed. But this beautiful realm was under attack by the consuming darkness, vast tentacles of destruction that reached between the islands of light and slowly dissolved everything they touched. The entities were not invaders from another dimension, but parasites that had somehow gained access to the foundation of existence itself. Clara realized with growing horror that the consuming darkness was not trying to destroy the spirit realm, but to digest it, to process the accumulated consciousness of every soul into raw energy that could be used to fuel its expansion into other dimensions. Every person whose town had been consumed, every spirit that had been absorbed by the advancing void, their essence was being harvested to strengthen the entity's assault on reality At the center of the parasitic infection, Clara found what appeared to be a massive heart made of crystallized despair, pumping waves of destruction throughout the spirit realm like infected blood through cosmic veins. The sight of it filled her with disgust and determination in equal measure, as she understood that destroying this central organ would cripple the entity's ability to coordinate their assault on existence. But approaching the heart meant navigating through layers of defense that included not only the consuming darkness, but also the corrupted consciousness of everyone who had been absorbed by the entities. Clara found herself facing twisted versions of people she had known, spirits that had been turned into weapons against the very realm they had once called home. Among the corrupted defenders, she recognized faces from Cedar Falls and other communities that had been consumed, their features distorted by the parasitic influence that controlled them. Most disturbing of all, she could see traces of their original personalities struggling against the corruption, aware of what they had become, but unable to resist the force that commanded their actions. "Help us," whispered the spirit of a child, whose light had been twisted into shadow. "We do not want to serve the darkness, but we cannot break free." Clara felt tears of compassion streaming down her consciousness as she realized that defeating the entities would require not just destroying their power source, but also finding a way to liberate the souls they had enslaved. The challenge seemed impossible, but she drew strength from her connection to Nathan and the community of Haven's Rest, feeling their combined determination flowing through the shadow link that anchored her to the physical world. Instead of fighting through the corrupted defenders, Clara began to sing, her voice carrying the glowing energy of her light-bearer, gifts and frequencies that resonated with the original nature of the enslaved souls. The song was wordless but filled with memories of home, family, love, and all the things that made existence meaningful beyond simple survival. The effect was immediate and profound. The corrupted spirits began to remember who they had been before. Their absorption, their twisted forms gradually returning to their original appearance, as Clara's song reminded them of their true identities. One by one, they turned away from defending the heart of darkness and began to add their own voices to her cosmic hymn. The liberation of the enslaved souls created a cascade effect throughout the spirit realm as more and more consciousness broke free from the parasitic control of the consuming entities. But this victory came at a cost, as the heart of crystallized despair began to pulse more violently, pumping waves of pure destruction in all directions as it sensed the loss of its defenders. Clara pressed forward through the increasingly hostile environment, her glowing markings blazing with power drawn from every soul she had helped liberate. The closer she came to the heart of darkness, the more she could feel its attempts to corrupt her own consciousness, whispering promises of power and threats of destruction in equal measure. "You cannot destroy us," the heart pulsed with evil. "Intelligence, we are the entropy that gives meaning to your order, the death that makes your life precious. Without us, existence becomes stagnant and purposeless." For a moment, Clara felt the seductive logic of the entity's argument. Destruction and creation were indeed linked in cosmic balance, and perhaps trying to eliminate one would upset the fundamental harmony of existence. But then she remembered the faces of the enslaved souls, the children who had been torn from their families, the communities that had been unmade not for cosmic balance, but for the entity's endless hunger. "You are not entropy or natural death," Clara replied, her voice carrying the authority of absolute moral certainty. "You are parasites that feed on the natural cycle of existence, corrupting it for your own purposes. True balance does not require the elimination of choice or the enslavement of consciousness." With that declaration, Clara reached out and placed her hands directly on the heart of crystallized despair, allowing her light-bearer abilities to flow directly into the core of the parasitic entity's power. The contact was agony beyond description, like touching the concentrated essence of every nightmare and sorrow that had ever existed. But Clara held on, drawing strength from her connection to Nathan and Haven's Rest, while pouring every ounce of her glowing energy into the task of transforming rather than destroying the heart of darkness. Instead of trying to eliminate the entities entirely, she began the delicate work of purifying their corrupted essence, restoring them to their original purpose as natural guardians of the boundary between life and death. The process required her to experience directly every soul that had been consumed, feeling their pain and fear while also celebrating their liberation. Through Nathan's shadow tether, she could sense his unwavering support, his shadow markings serving as an anchor that prevented her consciousness from being lost in the overwhelming flood of spiritual energy. As the purification reached its climax, Clara felt something fundamental shift in the structure of reality itself. The consuming entities were not destroyed but transformed, their parasitic hunger replaced by a natural instinct to guide souls through the proper transitions between life and death. The heart of crystallized despair became a heart of crystallized compassion, pumping waves of healing energy throughout the spirit realm. The change was immediately visible in both the spirit realm and the physical world, as the consuming darkness that had threatened Haven's Rest and countless other communities suddenly withdrew, replaced by a gentle aurora that seemed to welcome rather than threaten. The liberated souls began their proper journey toward whatever awaited them beyond death, while the corrupted bearers in the physical world found themselves freed from parasitic control. Clara felt herself being drawn back toward her physical form through Nathan's shadow tether, her consciousness returning to her body with a sensation like diving into warm, welcoming water. She opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by the concerned faces of her community, with Nathan's arms supporting her as her legs gave way from the spiritual exhaustion of her journey. "It's done," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cosmic song she had sung in the spirit realm. "The entities have been purified, and the boundaries between worlds are stronger than they've ever been." Nathan's shadow markings pulsed with relief and joy as he helped her stand, his gray eyes bright with emotions he no longer tried to hide. "Welcome home, Clara. I never doubted you'd find your way back to us." As word of their victory spread throughout Haven's Rest, Clara realized that this triumph was not an ending but a beginning. The community they had built and the love they had discovered were now protected by barriers that would endure for generations. But there were other settlements, other people with gifts who needed guidance and protection. The woman who had arrived as a rejected mail-order bride had become something far greater than she had ever imagined possible, and the future stretched ahead filled with infinite possibilities for service, growth, and love. 6 months after the cosmic battle that transformed the very nature of existence itself, Clara stood before the largest gathering of supernatural communities that had ever assembled in the American territories. Representatives from dozens of settlements had traveled to Haven's Rest to witness what had become known as the Luminous Accord, a treaty that would establish permanent cooperation between gifted individuals across the entire continent. The woman who addressed the assembly bore little resemblance to the frightened mail-order bride who had once been rejected for her unusual appearance. Clara's pale markings now pulsed with confident radiance that reflected her role as the acknowledged leader of the supernatural community, while her bearing carried the authority of someone who had literally reshaped the boundaries between worlds. "Friends and fellow travelers," Clara began, her voice carrying easily across the expanded amphitheater that had been carved into the living rock of the mesas surrounding Haven's Rest. "We gather today not as scattered outcasts hiding from a world that fears us, but as guardians of the sacred balance that allows all existence to flourish." Nathan stood beside the speaker's platform, his shadow markings flowing in patterns that complemented Clara's luminous energy, while his eyes never stopped scanning the crowd for potential threats. His role as her partner and protector had evolved far beyond their original alliance, though the depth of their relationship remained a source of quiet strength rather than public display. The transformation of the consuming entities had indeed strengthened the boundaries between worlds, But it had also created new responsibilities for those who could navigate the spirit realm. Communities across the territories had reported an increase in supernatural phenomena as the purified guardians of death began properly guiding souls through their transitions, requiring experienced mediators to help ordinary people understand and adapt to these changes. Mother Sage approached the platform with a scroll that contained the formal language of the luminous accord, her silver markings glowing with satisfaction at seeing her lifetime's work towards supernatural unity finally bearing fruit. "The compact is ready for signing," she announced to the assembled delegates, establishing Haven's Rest as the central hub for coordinating assistance to communities experiencing spiritual disruptions. The agreement represented months of careful negotiation between groups that had historically remained isolated from each other, brought together by the recognition that their combined strength far exceeded the sum of their individual abilities. Clara had personally visited dozens of settlements, using her light-bearer gifts to demonstrate how supernatural cooperation could benefit everyone involved. Balance Walker, the former shadow-bearer whose transformation had sparked the original alliance with the Spirit Hunters, stepped forward to represent the communities of reformed dark gift-bearers. The accord ensures that those who have misused their abilities in the past can find redemption through service to the greater good, they declared, their markings swirling in patterns that perfectly balanced light and shadow. As Clara watched the representatives from across the territories add their signatures to the historic document, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. The cosmic threat that had nearly destroyed existence itself had ultimately served to unite supernatural communities in ways that peaceful times never could have achieved. Rebecca Fade materialized beside the platform, her translucent form flickering between the physical and spirit realms as she delivered her report on the current state of the boundaries between worlds. "The purified guardians are performing their duties perfectly," she announced, guiding souls through proper transitions while maintaining the stability that protects both realms from future corruption. The success of the purification process had exceeded even Clara's most optimistic projections. The former consuming entities now served as benevolent shepherds for souls making the journey from life to death, ensuring that no consciousness became lost between worlds or trapped by parasitic influences. The cosmic balance that had been disrupted for eons was finally restored to its intended harmony. Samuel Ironwood, whose wooden markings had grown even more intricate since his escape from the consumed Cedar Falls, approached Clara with news that brought tears of joy to her eyes. "Miss Clara," he said with wonder in his voice, "the souls that were absorbed by the darkness, they're being released back to the proper flow of existence. My family, my neighbors, everyone we thought was lost forever, they're finally free to continue their journey." The liberation of the enslaved souls had been an unexpected benefit of transforming the consuming entities, as the purified guardians worked to undo the damage caused by their previous parasitic existence. Across the territories, people reported dreams and visions of deceased loved ones who had been trapped by the darkness, now appearing to offer comfort and closure before moving on to whatever awaited them beyond death. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the delegates began to disperse to carry news of the accord back to their home communities, Nathan joined Clara on the mesa overlooking Haven's Rest. The settlement had grown into a small city, its crystalline buildings housing nearly 1,000 residents, while the surrounding valleys welcomed visitors and students from across the continent. "Any regrets about the path that brought you here?" Nathan asked, his arm settling around Clara's waist with the comfortable familiarity of their established partnership. Clara leaned into his embrace, watching the aurora patterns dance above their transformed home while feeling the steady pulse of her luminous markings responding to his presence. "Only that it took so long for me to understand what I was truly meant to become," she replied softly. Their relationship had evolved naturally over the months since the cosmic battle, growing from professional partnership to deep emotional connection without requiring formal declarations or dramatic moments. They worked together, lived together, and faced challenges together with a unity that made them more effective than either could have been alone. The territorial governor has formally recognized Haven's Rest as an independent jurisdiction, Nathan reported, sharing news that had arrived with the morning's dispatches. We're no longer subject to the laws of Arizona Territory, but recognized as a sovereign community with the right to govern ourselves according to our own customs and needs. The legal recognition represented a significant victory for supernatural communities everywhere, establishing the precedent that gifted individuals could create their own societies rather than living as outcasts on the margins of ordinary civilization. Clara had worked tirelessly to demonstrate that supernatural abilities could benefit everyone when properly channeled and organized. As they talked, young voices drifted up from the settlement below where children with various supernatural markings played games that would have been impossible in the ordinary world. Some flickered between visibility like Rebecca Fade, others manipulated small amounts of light or shadow, and a few showed early signs of the rare gifts that marked them as potential guardians of cosmic balance. The next generation will grow up knowing they belong somewhere, Clara observed with satisfaction, understanding their gifts as blessings rather than curses to be hidden from the world. Nathan's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the future they were building together. Clara, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you about our personal arrangement. Clara felt her heart skip as she recognized the serious tone that suggested he was about to address the emotional connection they had carefully avoided defining. What kind of arrangement? Nathan turned to face her fully, his scarred features tender with emotions he no longer tried to conceal. The kind where I formally ask you to be my wife, not for protection or convenience, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. The proposal was simple and heartfelt, carrying none of the complexity that had surrounded her original arrangement with the fictional William Turner. Clara felt her luminous markings blaze with joy as she realized that this man who had protected and supported her through cosmic battles and community building was offering her a future based on genuine love rather than desperate necessity. Yes, she said without hesitation, rising on her toes to kiss him with passion that had been building for months. Yes to marriage, yes to building a life together, yes to whatever challenges and adventures await us in this world we've helped create. Their kiss was interrupted by cheers from the settlement below as residents who had been watching from a discreet distance celebrated the engagement of their beloved leaders. Clara laughed with delight as she realized their private moment had become a community celebration, with people streaming out of buildings to share in their joy. Over the following weeks, Haven's Rest prepared for what would be the first wedding between major supernatural leaders in recorded history. Representatives from allied communities brought gifts that defied natural law, while the ceremony itself would take place at the intersection of multiple spiritual realms to symbolize the unity between different aspects of existence. The wedding preparations also served as an opportunity to demonstrate the practical benefits of supernatural cooperation, as residents with various gifts collaborated to create decorations and arrangements that transformed the entire settlement into a work of living art. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, music seemed to emanate from the very air, and the aurora patterns above the mesas formed intricate designs that celebrated the union of light and shadow. On the morning of the ceremony, Clara woke to find her guest cottage filled with women from across the supernatural community, each offering their own traditions and blessings for the bride. Mother Sage had woven a wedding dress from crystallized starlight that seemed to float around Clara's form, while enhancing rather than competing with her luminous markings. You have become everything the spirit realm hoped you would be, Mother Sage said as she helped Clara prepare for the ceremony. A bridge between worlds, a unifier of divided people, and now a symbol of love's triumph over fear and isolation. The wedding took place at sunset when the boundaries between worlds were naturally most flexible, allowing guests from the spirit realm to attend alongside the living residents of Haven's Rest and visiting delegates. Clara walked down an aisle, lined with crystals that had been charged with the combined energy of every supernatural community in the territories, their combined radiance creating a pathway of pure light. Nathan waited at the altar wearing formal attire that had been modified to accommodate his shadow markings, the dark patterns flowing across his clothing in designs that perfectly complemented Clara's luminous dress. His expression as he watched, her approach carried wonder and devotion that made Clara feel like the most beautiful woman in any world. The ceremony itself was conducted by Balance Walker, whose unique combination of light and shadow gifts made them the perfect officiant for a union that represented the harmony between opposing forces. Their words spoke not just of personal commitment, but of cosmic partnership, acknowledging that Clara and Nathan's marriage would serve as an example for supernatural communities everywhere. Do you, Clara, promise to serve as Nathan's partner in all things, sharing your light with his shadows to create something greater than either could achieve alone? Balance Walker asked, their markings swirling in patterns that seemed to write the words in living energy. I do, Clara replied, her voice carrying across multiple dimensions as her luminous markings pulsed with absolute certainty. Do you, Nathan, promise to serve as Clara's protector and companion, using your gifts to support her purpose while building a life worthy of the love you share? Balance Walker continued. I do, Nathan answered, his shadow markings reaching out to intertwine with Clara's light in patterns that created new colors never before seen in any realm. As they exchanged rings forged from metals that existed only in the spirit realm, Clara felt the cosmic forces that had brought them together settling into new configurations that would sustain their partnership through whatever challenges the future might hold. Their union was not just a personal commitment, but a formal alliance between the forces of protection and guidance that would strengthen both their individual abilities and their shared purpose. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and included traditions from dozens of supernatural communities, creating new customs that would be remembered and repeated for generations. Clara and Nathan danced to music that seemed to emanate from the aurora itself while guests shared stories and demonstrations of their various gifts in an atmosphere of complete acceptance and joy. When the festivities finally concluded and the last delegates departed for their home communities, Clara and Nathan found themselves alone on their favorite mesa overlooking the settlement that had become the center of a new world. The transformation was complete, not just in the cosmic sense, but in the deeply personal sense of two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of their souls. So what comes next for the light bearer and her spirit walker? Nathan asked, using the titles that had evolved naturally from their roles in the community. Clara considered the question while watching the gentle aurora, patterns that now served as a permanent blessing over Haven's Rest. We continue building bridges between worlds and helping people understand that being different is not something to fear, but something to celebrate. We raise the next generation of gifted children to be confident guardians of cosmic balance. And we love each other through whatever adventures await us. As if summoned by her words, a new disturbance appeared at the edge of their awareness, not threatening like the consuming entities had been, but simply different, unusual, requiring investigation and possibly assistance. Clara felt her luminous markings respond with eager anticipation rather than fear, recognizing that their work as protectors and mediators would never truly be finished. Ready for another adventure, Mrs. Cross? Nathan asked with a smile that transformed his scarred features into something beautiful. Always, Clara replied, taking his hand as they prepared to investigate the new phenomena. As long as we face it together. The mail-order bride who had been rejected for her ghost skin had become the light bearer who united supernatural communities across the continent. The woman who had fled persecution and isolation had found love, purpose, and a home where her gifts were celebrated rather than feared. Most importantly, she had discovered that the markings She had always considered a curse were actually the sign of a calling that would allow her to serve as a guardian of existence itself. As Clara and Nathan set off to investigate the new mystery that awaited them, the aurora patterns above Haven's Rest pulsed with colors that had never before existed in any world, celebrating the union of light and shadow that would protect the boundaries between life and death for generations to come. Their story had become legend, but their work had only just begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.